Welcome to Kinship Cafe. I am your host, Jim Jones, and today we are joined with Ellyse Briand.
Hey, Jim.
Hey.
Super happy to be here.
Thanks so much for coming on today.
You're welcome.
And we're going to be talking about fermenting foods.
Yes.
And maybe just before we jump into all this, you could give us a little background. How did you get into this?
So I have a little company called the Culinary Gardener, but before that, I have been working on farms and growing food since 2011. And so I saw that there was a lot of opportunity to create foods and make things with all the leftovers. There's a lot of waste on farms sometimes, so seconds or things you bring to the market that you can't sell. I saw an opportunity to preserve those sorts of foods, and I really just fell in love with fermentation and pickling. I love fermentation, but I also do vinegar pickles as well, and we can talk about difference.
Yeah, I know, like on our little place, we've got a couple of different fruit trees, and two of them in particular, apricot and a tangerine tree, will just produce so much. And we can't possibly eat it all.
Right.
So finding ways, I imagine, like on the farm, ways to make that extend without going bad.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I feel like it's sort of a little bit of a lost art these days, and so it's nice to talk about how you can preserve things in different ways. And my specialty is fermentation.
Nice.
So I like that part.
And are there things that are good for you about eating fermented foods, or how does that work?
So there's been a lot of research and sort of development lately, especially with like gut-brain health. And so what I've sort of picked up and researched in my own time, there's a lot to do, sort of that piece is missing from our diet. Like a lot of different cultures have fermented foods and have over time been really, that's always been a part of the diet. And so we've kind of, especially in the U.S., lost that piece of it. Yeah. And so there's two reasons why I really love it, because preserving the food and preserving your harvest and being able to utilize those things, like you said, with your fruit trees when you can't, and then also like what it does to our guts and our microbiome and all of the things that are coming out now, how important it is for our gut, our large intestine, and all of that, like flora and fauna and all of the things that are in our gut, like are really, they really impact how we are and how we go about our day to day. And I mean, even on the way here, I was listening to a book on tape talking about how our moods can change. It can affect depression. It can affect how inflammation and how our whole systems work. So I think it's super important, and it's a really I like to teach about it because it's something people can use as a tool to become even healthier. Yeah,
absolutely. Well, at Kinship Cafe, we've liked to focus on this idea about life and well-being, and so this definitely falls in that category. Yes. And one of the things we've talked about in the past, in getting into like different mindfulness things, is they'll talk about how we actually have 4 brains, right? So you've got kind of that core early part of the brain that handles all the stuff that you're not conscious of, like your heart rate and all that kind of thing. Yeah. And then we've got the newer part, the outer cortex, which is divided into the right and left hemispheres, and they have very distinct roles. And then the fourth is exactly what you said, the gut.
The gut.
There's like 100,000 neurons in your intestines.
And a lot of times people think gut brain is like, oh, it tells me I'm hungry, and that's kind of it. But there's so much more to it than that, and there's so much more being developed, and now, like, people are researching it now and coming up and finding new things about how important our gut is and keeping it healthy, and how that is sort of like a missing piece in especially Western medicine, and how we've sort of come so far away from that, and how we can sort of bring it back to the table now.
Absolutely. Great. Well, I'm excited about this. Let's get started with bringing some stuff out.
Yes.
Okay. I got to tell you, I'm pretty excited about this. You are our first cooking show, so to speak.
Great.
So I'm very excited about how this is going to work out.
Uh-huh.
And there's food.
It's going to be great.
Yeah. Okay, so why don't you give us a little rundown on what we're looking at here?
Okay, sure. Okay. All right, so we have so many different things. As you know, in San Diego, we have so many... we have such an abundance of things all the time, so it's a really great place to be able to preserve the harvest because it's just so much going on all the time. So a couple of seasonal things I have right now is this butternut squash kimchi that's really nice. I have some golden beets over there, yes, that are fermented with cumin seed.
Okay.
There's some green beans, which are sort of like a shoulder vegetable. It's called when the summer is still sort of going into the winter and you're having this weird time of, it's called the shoulder season. So sometimes you have things available that would be summer into winter. So the green beans are the shoulder season crop, as well as the pickles. The pickles are fermented with not fermented, they're vinegar brine pickles, and I can talk about the difference between vinegar brines versus fermented foods and how they're different, but all pickles.
Okay, great. Well, this looks good, and it looks like you've kind of prepared some things for me to try here.
I did.
So what should I try first, and what does it relate to here?
Okay, great. Yeah. So the recipe we're going to be making today is fermented eggs, and so I brought some fermented eggs for you to try, and I also brought some pickled eggs, and I guess this is a good time to talk about the difference between pickles and fermented food.
Sure.
So
should I go ahead and try one of these?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
So the pickle, the fermented egg is fermented with onions and jalapeno, and it gets a little creamy. It's a 3-day ferment. The vegetables are what sort of gets active, and the salt brine sort of permeates the egg, and it's really nice.
And how long do they last after they're fermented?
They sort of change over time into different textures.
Stages?
Yeah, but I would say anywhere from a month or two in the fridge, depending on how you like them. They'll get different textured over time, but once they're fermented, they sort of stay.
So you've got a little something on this one here. This is the fermented one, correct?
Yes.
And so what have you topped this off with?
So I made some homemade aioli, which is just, I know aioli is pretty similar to mayonnaise in that you use egg yolk and a oil to emulsify it. So I mixed it with egg yolk, garlic, and lemon to make an aioli, and then I have a pickled red onion on top, and that is also pickled with a vinegar brine, and then I cured some caper berries from Temecula Olive Oil Company Ranch, and it takes about 10 days to cure them. You change the water, and then I fermented them in the salt brine.
All right.
So everything is pickled or fermented on that egg bite.
Well, let's go ahead and give this a try here.
Sure. So it's sort of like a deconstructed deviled egg. And that's sort of, I like to serve those at events and things because they're fun. And then, so we also have the pickled egg, which is done in a similar fashion, but I make a beet pickle first, and that's why it's colored pink.
Gotcha.
You make the beet pickles, and then you use the pink brine to soak the eggs. Yeah.
Gotcha. So on the fermented egg, it's very similar to just like a regular hard-boiled egg. So what are you gaining besides the nice flavor by having it fermented?
Well, you got all the good bacteria in there.
Okay.
But you're also being able to keep it in your fridge for longer. You asked how long you could keep it in there.
That's right.
And it will stay for a couple of months, where some eggs won't. I mean, you could even have it for up to 6 months, but it sort of just depends on what textures you feel like you want to.
So does it get softer over time?
It gets sort of like no, it gets harder actually.
Oh,
it sort of gets like. What would the texture be like?
More rubbery?
Rubbery, yes.
Yeah.
It gets a little bit more rubbery, but it doesn't go bad, whereas like an egg hard boiled in your fridge will go bad after a couple days, a week or so.
Gotcha. Okay, so this then is the pickled egg.
Yes.
I'm gonna try the one without the topping this time.
Sure.
And the pink is from the pickled beets.
Yes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I like that.
Yeah.
And that has more of the traditional kind of vinegary
Mm-hmm.
kind of pickle taste.
Yep. I think they get a little bit creamier too when they're pickled or.
Yeah, it makes for real nice in the summer when it's hot.
Mm-hmm.
That nice and chilled would
Yeah.
be really nice.
Yes.
So what else are we looking at here?
So we have some other fermented foods. I have brought some sauerkraut and some of those.
This is the sauerkraut
Yeah, that's
here?
a sauerkraut. That's so that's garlic and dill, which is a pretty simple kraut to make. You just add garlic, dill, cabbage, and salt and thyme, and that's
Time is in period of time. not-
Time.
Yeah.
Time.
T-I-M-E.
T-I-M-E, the length of time it takes. Yeah.
And so how
ferment.
long does it take for something like to ferment?
So when I'm doing certain vegetables are different lengths. So for sauerkraut, and when I teach classes about sauerkraut, I always say at least 7 days, and then 7 to 14 days is sort of your time frame, and that's dependent on the temperature. If it's warmer, it's going to ferment faster. If it's cooler, it's going to take less time. And it also depends on how you like it. If you like it a little more sour, you let it go a little longer and get that like really sour, like the sour pickle taste.
Nice.
Is the fermented taste that will become stronger over time.
Yeah. So growing up, my grandma would make this sauerkraut and like pork concoction that would be on the stove. So it's actually cooking. Is that using like already fermented sauerkraut, and they kind of combine this into whatever they're making, or
Possibly. I don't see why you couldn't, but once you cook it,
it
the
kind of
benefits.
changes?
Yeah, the benefits would be less, I think. So a lot of times people can sauerkraut, and that sort of kills all of the good bacteria.
Gotcha.
So it still has that same flavor. It's still preserved for later use, but fermented foods are alive, and so if you put heat to them, it kills those bacteria.
Gotcha. So when you're doing like the kraut dog or whatever, it's better to have a cold sauerkraut then.
Yeah, you could have room temp, but as soon as you heat it to cook, that's where if you can it, if you cook it, it's still a vegetable, it's still going to be healthy for you, still going to like have the same properties as cooked vegetables,
yes.
but not the same properties as the fermented food, which is like the good bacteria that you want for your gut.
Gotcha. And so then these are the green beans.
Yes.
And these are fermented?
Those are fermented with garlic, a little spice, and some Italian spices and herbs.
Very nice.
Yeah, those ones are my favorite actually so far.
And so this is a beet?
Yeah, that's a beet.
With the cumin?
Yep, pickled with whole cumin seeds.
Cumin.
Interesting. Potato. Do you taste the sourness?
Yeah.
Yeah, those have been sort of curing once they're finished to the sourness that I like.
Seeds here, right?
Yep. Then you'll put them in the fridge, and then they slowly will keep fermenting. So the flavors keep developing, and that's what I really like. Especially sauerkraut, I like it like 6 months later. Like that's my favorite when it's like really developed. It has all of those flavors like really melded together. But I mean, that's in the fridge, and the temperature, like I said, makes the ferment go really slow or really fast, and the fridge will make it go really fast. So it is like very slowly continuing to ferment. So the flavors just become deeper.
Gotcha. And then this is the radish kimchi?
Yeah, so that's the radish kimchi, and that's the one that's also, I would call it aged. It's an older variety.
That is really nice.
Yeah, that one, it sort of mellows out over time. It starts off like very crunchy and sort of spicy like a regular radish, and then also the same marinade or the same paste is on that as is on the kimchi with the butternut squash, and you'll see that they're different flavors based on how young and old they are.
Gotcha. So what's in here besides the butternut squash?
There is leek.
Okay.
And Napa cabbage, like a sort of like
So
a
there's still
regular
some cabbage in
style
it, too.
kimchi. Yep.
Mhm.
Whereas the radish doesn't have the cabbage in it.
Mm.
And the butternut squash is raw, so I don't cook it before I put it in there. So it takes a little bit longer than a traditional kimchi, which is like a 3 to 5 day ferment, but I did that for 8 days.
Gotcha. Okay. And then these are more of a regular pickle.
Yeah,
right?
so those are a bread and butter pickle with a hatch chili vinegar that the Temecula Olive Oil Company makes, which is really great. And a lot of times when I'm teaching classes too, I'll talk about if you're using higher quality ingredients, you're going to get a higher quality product. So I like to use red wine vinegars, champagne vinegars, white wine vinegars, even like balsamic, and then I'll mix vinegar sometimes. Not like the dark balsamics, but like the lighter balsamics, I'll mix them with the white wine or the vinegar or the red wines to make like different flavors and more like in-depth flavors.
Nice. I really like the hint of the green chili in there.
Yeah, like on the back.
Yeah, love the hatch green chili. So then we got a little odd man out here. What are we looking at
Yes.
with this?
So that's one of my favorite ingredients to use in cooking. It is a sort of Moroccan-style salted lime. So instead of a preserved lemon, I did limes, and they turned yellow after they became ripe, and then they were sort of soft, and I put them, all you do is put salt and the juice of the limes on top and let it sit for at least a month, and it sort of breaks it down and becomes this like beautiful, salty,
Really?
limey ingredient. It's different.
Yeah. I can see how this would be something you use to season something else.
Yes.
It would be pretty strong to just eat it by itself.
Yeah. So I put a little piece there just so you could try. But
So
I
this-
usually put it in soups. There's like a Moroccan-style chicken called tagine, I believe it's called. After I said it, I wasn't sure. But yeah, that's usually what the lemons are used for. But that's one of my favorite ways to preserve citrus.
That's really neat. So now you said your company is the Culinary Gardener?
Yes.
Okay, and so what kinds of things do you do with this company?
So it's primarily, I try to focus on education. So this is a great place
example,
to be. Yeah. I like to, so I teach classes, and I also have this thing called a pickle party where I will bring all of the ingredients and all of the tools and everything to your home. So if you wanted to have a private class, if you wanted to learn how to make a certain one of these ferments. So if you really want to make kimchi, or you really wanted to learn how to make sauerkraut, but I'm not having a class coming up, you can contact me and I'll bring all of the ingredients. You can get a couple of friends together and we make it together, and then everybody goes home with the jar and some fermenting tools.
Great. Well, and this would probably be, and let me just also say, we'll have this information in the show notes.
Great.
So that people will know how to get a hold of you.
Great.
And this is, I'm assuming, in the greater Southern California area?
Yeah, so I live in San Diego, but I do a lot of things here in Fallbrook, and I do a lot of things in the area. So I'm willing to travel, but I also do events and private parties. So if anybody's looking for a pickle bar, you can check out my Instagram and see what that looks like.
Okay,
Which is
and
really
maybe we'll
fun.
put some pictures up for that too.
Yes.
So then the hardware here, why don't you tell us a little bit about what that is?
Sure. So I am a very firm believer in everybody can ferment. So I brought these to show you which kind of tools you can use, but everybody can ferment. You don't have to have these tools, and I just want to say that right out the gate, because I feel like people can be intimidated by fermentation and can feel like they have to buy all of these certain things. A lot of times all it takes is this jar, and if you have a sauerkraut to make everything under the brine, you have a weight, and you'll put this jar inside this jar. So it's really just using what you have to be able to make the product that you want to make. And so I just brought these things to showcase sort of what is out there. But
Okay.
so what it's usually really important for things like sauerkraut and anytime you have a brine with a pickle in it, you want to have some sort of weight to keep everything under the brine, because
So it's not getting exposed to the air directly.
yeah, because if you if anything is coming out of the brine and is directly touching, if it gets exposed to the oxygen, it can create molds, it can create yeast, it can create other sorts of things that are going to make your ferment go bad. So if you have the weight, the fermentation, everything that's happening is anaerobic. So as soon as oxygen hits it, it
changes everything.
Yeah. So it's important to have some sort of weight, which is what I was sort of showing with the jar, to have everything under the brine.
And that's just like a glass disc kind of.
It's just a glass disc. There's another type here that doesn't have the little handle, but it's nice to have this when you're putting it in. This is called an airless lock, these two things. This one goes on small mouth jars. This one would go on wide mouth jars. The airless lock, or the waterless airlock, doesn't have water. So it's releasing the CO2 while not letting oxygen in.
Gotcha. So it just kind of pushes out, but it doesn't open up.
So anaerobic, so the bacteria is anaerobically producing whatever it's doing in there, but it's releasing carbon dioxide. And so that carbon dioxide needs somewhere to go, because if it doesn't go anywhere, the jar will potentially explode.
Gotcha.
I haven't had that happen, but it can happen. This is called a regular airlock, but it has water in it, so the water is making sure that oxygen doesn't go in. So it's just a different type.
So it just bubbles out of that one.
And this contraption is really great. It's called a kraut source, and this piece will sit on top of the different ferments.
So it's pushing it down.
Pushing it down, you have the spring, and then you can lock it in place. And then see how it has this moat?
Yes.
You'll fill that with water and put this on top. So that creates a moat. So in those old time big crocks that they used to make sauerkraut in, they would have this water lock with the moat.
Gotcha.
So all of these things are doing the same function. They're keeping the oxygen out while letting the CO2 be released.
And the ceramic things are just additional weights for weighting things down?
Yep. So it's just if you have a bigger vessel, you can get different size clay or any type of weight. You can use a plate. Some people even boil a rock and put it in. That's sort of like the old-timey method.
Yeah.
So yeah, you can use sort of, the only thing I wouldn't use is non-food grade plastic or something that's not very clean. Just making sure it's clean. If you're going to use a rock or something like that, boiled. Glass works really well.
Okay.
And like a jar inside of a jar.
Gotcha. All right. Well, that's good. Not very complicated.
Right.
But maybe we should step through a particular recipe to kind of get a sense for how this works.
Sure.
And if people want to dive deeper into any of this kind of stuff, is there some resources you could recommend for learning more about this?
Yes.
Besides, of course, inviting you for a home party.
Yes. I actually have some really great resources right here beside me. My favorite is called Wild Fermentation.
Okay.
This is sort of how I got started. The author is Sander Katz. He is sort of like the guru of modern movement of fermentation.
Okay.
He sort of started it again, I would say like in the 80s. I really like his approach. He is also of the belief that everybody can ferment. It doesn't have to be difficult. It doesn't have to be scary. He talks sort of like in broad terms, like once you have the grasp of a sauerkraut recipe, then you can start adding different things. And I like his approach because I'm not really a recipe follower myself. So it's nice to have that
freedom to explore.
Yeah. And a lot of people, there's sort of two camps. There's this sort of there's this like camp where you have to weigh everything, and you have to have exactly the right amount of salt, and you have to have your vegetables weighed, and it won't be exactly right if you don't have everything precise. And there's sort of this other camp that's like, well, 5 pounds of cabbage to about 3 tablespoons of salt is gonna, a 0.01 salt gram of salt isn't going to change that whole ratio.
Gotcha.
And so I'm sort of that camp where once you understand like how much
The basic
the
ratios.
basic ratios and how much vegetable to salt is going to be adequate, then you sort of play around with it from there.
So,
But I do have one more.
Okay.
This is called Ferment Your Vegetables. She has some really great simple recipes, and she also is sort of the belief of experimenting, but she does have charts, and she has a salt chart and how to calculate if you are a recipe follower and you really like to do exactly what the book tells you. This is a really great one.
okay, so with all of this, we're talking about salt. How does this relate to if somebody's in a position where they, for a medical reason, need to pay attention to how much salt they eat? Is this like a lot of salt we're talking about in these foods?
Well, so when you are making a recipe, it does seem like a lot of salt. But I tell people a lot of times, you're not going to eat an entire jar of sauerkraut. You're not going to eat 3 tablespoons at a time of sauerkraut. And while the bacteria is not eating the salt, but it sort of like mellows over time. It doesn't disappear, but it definitely...
It distributes pretty evenly.
It distributes, and there's not going to be concern of too much salt. Also, the salt we're using, it's important to only use sea salt or salt that doesn't have any anti-caking agents, nothing added. You can use sea salt, kosher salt. I mean, even like Himalayan salts, the different minerals in that is fine as long as it doesn't have any sort of like additives.
Gotcha.
So that's super important. No iodine, no table salt. So I feel like sometimes salt is an issue for people. There are certain recipes which is a little bit more advanced where they're using kelp or they're using different sorts of different ways to ferment the food, but that I feel like is a little bit more advanced because salt is what is keeping the bad bacteria from growing while enabling the good bacteria to grow.
Good. Okay. So what are we going to build here?
Great. So we are going to make some fermented eggs.
Yay.
They're super easy, and they're good to showcase because so many people in Fallbrook especially have backyard chickens. It's a good way to take a resource that it may be abundant at times and be able to preserve it, have a little fun with it, make it a little bit more delicious.
Yeah.
And go from there.
So I see we've got onion and jalapeno like the ones that we sampled here.
Yes.
What are some other varieties of things that you've made these with that came out well?
So usually, if you don't like jalapeno, you can just omit it.
Okay.
100%. I usually like to add some sort of vegetable when I am fermenting eggs because that jumpstarts the bacteria. Your good bacteria, the lactobacillus, is on your vegetables already. So that is what creates the vegetables themselves have the bacteria on them, and so that starts the process. So eggs don't necessarily have that.
Gotcha.
Bacteria
Especially
on them.
if you just boiled them.
Right, and they're proteins. So the lactobacillus really likes the vegetables versus the proteins.
So onion's good with it.
So onion's good. So onion, I've done onions, garlic. You could even put a little bit of cabbage in there just to cabbage is one of the most microbial abundant. So sometimes I'll just put a leaf of cabbage on top just to keep everything under and then use that as with the weight. I don't know. I generally just do garlic and onion because I like the flavor.
Yeah.
I could see how putting whole spices in sometimes would be good. I wouldn't necessarily put any sort of leafy greens or any sort of herbs, but I would put coriander or the cumin or peppercorns, whole seeds or spices.
Yeah. Okay.
Which would be nice. But
Great.
Yeah, today we're just going to do the onion and the jalapeno, and you can seed it or not seed it. I like spicy, so I don't usually seed it.
I like spicy too.
Great. And then I think earlier you may have asked if you could eat these afterwards.
Oh yeah, the vegetables.
Yeah, and yes, you can. They'll be very yummy. You can eat them right on the egg after you take it out as a little snack. They'll be fermented. So.
And so, for how many eggs are we going to do in this recipe?
1 quart fits about 9.
Okay, so can you put in more than like just a single jalapeno, or like can
you could
get more vegetables in there too?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, you could sort of you could do less eggs and put more vegetables in. Yeah, for sure. Maybe make it stronger. But yeah, I'll start by just
go ahead.
chopping up my vegetables, and then I've already boiled and peeled most of these, but I do have one because I have a trick.
Okay.
I had to peel a lot of eggs for an event I did recently, and I was really struggling because farm fresh eggs can be really difficult to peel.
So when you say a lot of eggs, what are we talking about?
I did 130.
Oh my goodness. Okay. That is a lot of eggs.
It was a lot of eggs. And so I was feeling really frustrated. Actually, I'll just show you now. I'll show you the trick.
Great.
So I was sort of scouring the internet, seeing like old wives' tales, or adding the salt, adding the baking soda. I tried different things for almost every batch. I steamed some. I boiled some. I started with hot. I started with cold. I literally did everything, but nothing was really working great until I found this peeling trick, which you just take your spoon and you break the whole egg around. And I think this works nice, because also slamming it sometimes it will break open, which is like not super ideal. So this always gets like a nice crack around the edges. We'll move this over here all the way around, and then we'll just put this on the edge here. So basically I'm just peeling it a little bit, and this one is sticking up quite a bit, and it would take me forever just to peel this a little bit. So
then
I found this trick with this spoon. So you just stick it right under, and what you're doing is like pushing it against your thumb, so you're not taking the egg white with you.
And you're going around.
And I'm just going around. And it literally made my life so much better.
Look at that.
After I learned this trick. Ooh.
Got a little bit off.
Got a little bit off.
Yeah.
But
wow.
That was because I was rushing. And it also works pretty well if you're under the sink, with just a small stream.
Gotcha.
So it gets the water up in there. But it was pretty much a lifesaver when I was peeling a million eggs.
Yeah, I can imagine.
So,
All right. I like good tips.
Yeah, so that's it. I felt like I wanted to share that because it was definitely one of the only things that worked much better than anything else. So we're basically just going to cut these into larger chunks.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to put this back here for now. You can cut your vegetables into any size chunks you want, really. The smaller the vegetable chunks when you're fermenting anything, sort of the faster it will start fermenting. So if you were going to do sauerkraut or kimchi, kimchi is sometimes a bigger chop, but you want to have all of your vegetables similar size, because the bacteria the more surface area there is, the faster it will ferment, versus the slower it will ferment. So I like to just do these in like sort of bigger chunks.
Because you want just kind of a medium speed is why you're doing bigger chunks?
Yeah, and this is a good recipe to showcase too that you can have different times. So eggs, I usually only let ferment for three or 4 days, depending on the temperature.
Okay.
And so the chunks in this one aren't really gonna matter as much.
Yeah, and again, to stop the fermentation or to slow it down is when you put it in the fridge.
Mm-hmm. And so that's when it's sort of like preserved. That the fridge, the temperature is gonna be able to keep your eggs
kind of at a consistent,
and that's where you'll have them be able to be preserved for longer and eat them for a longer time.
Okay.
So I always start with my vegetables in the bottom. So we're gonna do half the onion in the bottom.
Okay.
And then we're just gonna chop this into rounds. And when I do my classes and things, I talk a little bit about knife skills.
Mm-hmm.
I just like to have when you're using a larger chef's knife, if you put your finger right here on the blade, you have a little bit more control. That's just a good also a nice little trick. So we're just going to put some of these in. If you do put the seeds in, you'll probably get some floaters. But if you swish your jar every now and then to create a little bit of friction, nothing will really grow on the surface.
On the seeds?
Mm-hmm.
So they're a little different than the vegetables themselves.
Yeah, well, so if you have things in your ferment that are going to float, like whole spices or the seeds, those can, break the surface of your brine.
Okay.
And so those sometimes can hit the air, and that's where you can get molds and things like that.
So in this case, then?
In this case, it's a 3-day ferment, so if you do have some of the seeds come up, you'll just swish your jar every so often when you're walking by it, if you see them.
Gotcha. Okay.
Just disturbing the surface is going to make it
Good to know.
less likely to grow mold, but it's a fast one, so I wouldn't imagine that it won't anyway.
Okay.
So we're just going to stick our eggs in. I would advise, if you do have
Something broken.
some showing,
Mm-hmm.
you could put it at the top. It just might get cloudy and a little bit
Gotcha.
funny in there, so you kind of you don't want your bacteria to go like in the crevices. You want sort of like a clean,
Gotcha.
nice egg.
And so then, when you're doing your eggs, how long do you normally boil them? Like, are you looking for like a hard-boiled, soft-boiled type thing? Or?
It's sort of up to you. I like mine, the ones I did on the plate, I think were a little bit over
Okay.
cooked. I like mine a little bit more than soft-boiled. I don't know what the correct term would be.
So just barely hard-boiled.
Just barely hard-boiled, and I feel like sometimes that like the salt sort of can permeate the egg better and sort of gets a little bit
Okay.
more, I don't know, flavorful.
So on the ones where you said like the yolk is showing, then you're saying that those will kind of change sooner, so you want to have those at the top so you can eat them faster or before the other ones? Or?
Yeah, well, I just feel like if they're on the bottom and you're like sort of reaching around in there,
it might kind of come apart.
Yeah, sort of break it. So
Gotcha.
I don't really think it's that big of a deal. It's just I would put it at the top.
Yeah, no worries.
Then I always put a little bit more, like a little bit of a layer in there just to for flavor. Put those in there and then top it off.
And that just needs to be able to be below wherever the water's at.
Right. So I wouldn't put it all the way. I wouldn't put another egg in here or put any more vegetables in. Usually when you're making any sort of fermented recipe, you want about an inch of head space.
Okay.
Which is sort of, right below right at the shoulder or right under the first
That lip
line.
there. Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so for these, there's different recipes call for different salinity brines.
Okay.
And so
Salinity meaning how much salt is in it?
yes.
Okay.
So if you're reading a recipe online and it says green beans call for 3% salinity, there's like salt charts and ways to figure that out. But generally what I go by is if you're going to have a quart of water, putting 3 tablespoons of salt in that is going to be a 5% salt brine.
So when you say a quart of water, obviously that won't be a whole quart because you're offset with all the eggs and vegetables.
Right.
So you're doing a quart of water, 3 tablespoons of salt, and then of that mixture, however much will fit in the jar?
Yep.
Gotcha.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
So that is actually a really good question because a lot of times when you're calculating salinity for meat, you're taking into account the weight
Okay.
of the meat. Which
You ferment meat?
No. I'm just saying for like a lot of times if you're looking up how can like Google how can I make a 5% salt brine, it talks about turkeys or brining meats and things. So it's just you're basically just making a brine with your salt and
so the solution is just based off of the water.
Right.
And then you just want to have a consistent salinity in that solution for however much fits in the jar after you put your stuff in.
Exactly. And it
Okay.
can be different for different things. So for the Beets, I think I did a 3% salt brine. For carrots, sometimes I do a 2.5. I don't usually add a brine to sauerkraut, but if it looked really dry and I needed to, this one is done, and I took it out of the fridge just to show the vessel. But if it needed to be under the brine, you can add a 2% salt brine just to cover it, but it's usually not necessary.
So in this case, though, we're doing for a quart of water, we're adding 3 tablespoons of salt.
Yes.
And this constitutes of 5%, you said?
Yes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. And so I have a quart right here of water, and so we're just going to add 3 tablespoons and then stir it up. You can, to do it quickly, you can always heat like a cup of water and
to dissolve the salt
to
faster.
dissolve your salt, yeah, and then add the rest of the water. You wouldn't want to add, this will be loud, you wouldn't want to add hot water ever to a ferment.
Gotcha.
Okay.
So does this look good then?
So this looks good.
Okay.
So this, so the salt is dissolved, and all we're gonna do is pour over this 5% salt brine over our eggs.
And this you try to go most of the way to the top?
Yeah, I mean,
Or
I'm just want to cover whatever's in there.
Is this going to have a weight in there too that you need to account for, or
We are gonna do it to show, but it's not super necessary with
eggs?
With eggs. The little vegetables might float up, which is, see how like already the
Bubbles and stuff?
the bubbles and
And seeds.
the seeds are floating up, and like this little guy's floating up. So we will put a little weight in there.
Okay.
We also, there's one more step, and then we'll be done with this ferment. I don't always do this, but with eggs, because they are a protein, and because I like the taste of this is the brine from the green beans. And so this already has the lactic acid bacteria, and it's just, it's called backslopping when you take a brine from something else and put it into a ferment that is just starting. I don't always think it's necessary, but...
So when you ferment something like the green beans, and the green beans are all done, you would actually retain the leftover fluid.
Yeah, a lot of people also use this as a gut shot, they call it, and so they'll take a little sip of it because it has all the good bacteria, probiotics, enzymes, all the good things that are in the vegetable are also in the brine.
Okay.
So we're just going to take...
Just a quick question. How long does that last for?
This?
Yeah.
The brine?
You just hold on to it?
Yeah.
Okay.
As long as a ferment would last. Like I said, I've had things in my fridge for like 6 months to a year, and I'll forget that it's back there, and then I'll pull it out, and I'll be like, I don't know, this might be weird. I'll smell it, I'll taste it, and I'm like, oh, it's actually better. Then I thought,
isn't that
these
funny?
ones are probably about a month old.
Okay.
And so we're just going to put a tablespoon. Sometimes I put 2. Sort of just
kind
depends
of
on
a
how
Kickstarter.
I'm feeling. Yeah, we're going to do 1 today. We're just going to do 1 tablespoon.
Okay.
And, I like the taste of this, so it sort of just is enhancing the flavor as well. And then this weight is kind of large, but we're going to use it anyway.
Large for that size of a jar, or
just because we
added some water in there?
added a lot of...
Might have to spoon some of it out.
Yeah. But we also don't necessarily need that. So for another way I didn't explain before is if you did just put the cover on like this.
Yeah. Turn it upside down.
Yeah, we'll mix it up from that the brine that was in the top. This is on your counter, every 24 hours or so, it's called burping it. You just turn it,
open
and
it,
you let the air out, and the air comes out, and then you turn it back on. Or you can just
leave
leave
this.
this.
To make sure stuff is pushed down, or.
Well, so for something like this, that's only going to be a 3-day ferment, and you're like moving it around and you're burping it.
It's not an issue.
It's not really an issue. If you had something that was going to be a 2-week ferment, 14 days, you might not be able to babysit it for the whole time. So you would want everything under the brine, and you would want, that's where you would really want your airlock and your weight.
The burper thing.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you could put this on just to release it. We could do that. So this is how this would work. You would just put this on top, and your weight goes, and your band goes back on. And so this has a little hole in the top, so
And it will just burp itself, though.
burp itself.
Yeah.
Yep. And then so you don't have to worry about burping it.
So if I'm going to agitate it, though, can I turn it upside down with that on there? Or do I just shake it in this case?
Yeah, you can just give it a little. I mean, we put so much in there that it
It's
came
pretty
up to the top. Sometimes if you overfill it, like I just demonstrated, and you have a really active ferment, it can start bubbling out the top.
Okay.
So you might want to put this on a plate
Little
or something.
tray.
Yep.
Mhm.
When you get home.
Great. Well, I'm excited.
Yeah, super
That'd be
easy.
Yeah. Well, this has been very exciting.
Yeah.
Any last words of wisdom you'd like to share with our audience?
Yes. If you are fermenting foods, there's sort of 3 steps. Make sure it's under the brine. Use a sea salt, something that doesn't have iodine or anti-caking agents, and make sure it's the right temperature for success.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the show today. This has been our first cooking episode.
Yeah.
So I'm very excited that you came on to do this today.
Thanks for having me. It was really great.
Yes. All right. Well, thank you. And be well, everyone.